So guys, today I'm testing out the Canon EOS R3 for wildlife photography. Pretty excited to be testing this out. I rented it for about 5 days here and out here at Land Between the Lakes, just testing it out on elk right now. Just had a few over here up on the hill. I went down over the backside, but yeah, really liking it so far and excited to continue testing it over the next few days. So I'm gonna keep shooting while the light is good, and I will update you guys here in just a minute. So guys, pretty good shoot there with the elk. Definitely a lot of activity out there today. Don't really think that I got any photos or video that I was necessarily super happy with, any really great photos, but I was able to really put the R3 to the test, which was the main goal. Rather than getting good photos, my main goal was to get photos that really push the R3's abilities and really were testing it out to really see what it could do. And able to get some photos to test out low light capabilities and shoot all the way up at like 16,000 and 12,800 ISO. And just looking at them on the back of the camera, they look pretty darn good, pretty clean, and very minimal noise. Pretty impressed by that, but obviously I haven't gotten them onto the computer to look at that yet. And in this video, I don't really plan on doing any at the desk, you know, looking at it in detail on the computer stuff. These are just my initial thoughts as I'm testing it out in the field. That's the goal of this video, and then I'll do a whole review that goes more in depth later on down the road. But yeah, like I said, really liking it so far. I was able to test out ISO range from 100 all the way up to 16,000, and definitely planning on testing that further as time goes on. Also really noticing that I love the vertical grip on this. I really want to get a battery grip for my R5 now, because that is a really nice feature that I didn't realize I was missing out on. And then the last thing that I was able to test out a little bit today, but I definitely need to test out further, is the autofocus, and more specifically the eye control autofocus, which is basically where you calibrate the camera to sense your eye, and wherever you put your eye in the frame as you're moving it around is where it's going to focus. And I'm not so sure about it so far. I mean, it works pretty well. The eye autofocus does. It follows your eye pretty well and focuses right there. But the issue is it's not really set up for wildlife very well unless you're shooting just a stationary subject, or unless you're just trying to capture the initial autofocus point, and then you'll, you know, switch over to animal eye AF or something like that for later on. You can't really use it with wildlife, especially moving wildlife, super well so far, I'm noticing. And it can often interfere when I'm trying to use animal eye AF, which is, you know, just the standard animal eye tracking that we've had since the R5 and R6. So I'm not so sure about eye control so far. As far as animal eye AF, it works just as flawlessly as it does on the R5. Very, very good there. But the eye control AF, and I want to make sure I'm differentiating between these two. Animal eye is where it tracks the animal's eye. Eye control is where it senses your eye and focus point follows your eye. Eye control AF, I need to test further and see what I really think about that. So yeah, overall was a good shoot today. Was able to put it through its paces well, and I'm going to be back out tomorrow morning to shoot again and see what else I can get out of this camera. So guys, I'm out here testing out the R3 again this morning. I've got a few shots out here of some birds in this little local park here. I haven't gotten anything too special this morning, nothing that I think is really like a spectacular photo. But again, the main point of this vlog is more to put the R3 through its paces and test it out rather than to get good photos. And this morning, mainly, like I said, I've gotten some birds, some pretty small birds, and that has allowed me to really test how much I'm going to be able to crop on this camera, because they were relatively small in the frame, big enough to where they're going to have some detail, but especially with that 24 megapixels, when I crop in, it's going to be a test on the R3 to see how much detail was maintained there. They look pretty good on the back of the camera. They still look really sharp when I crop in, and it looks like there's still a lot of detail there, but obviously with less megapixels, you're going to have less detail. So we'll see how they come out, but just on the back of the camera they look pretty good. So I've been able to test that a little bit, and at this point I think my favorite feature of the R3 is this little touch dial on the back of the camera that allows you to move your autofocus point around the screen. It's probably not called the touch dial. I have no clue what it's called, to be honest, but it's much more quick, much more accurate than the joystick, and it's something that I really wish was integrated onto the R5 now, because I'm loving it on this camera. You can just put your thumb or your finger on there and really just slide it around, and it moves that autofocus point extremely quickly with perfect accuracy, and it is really just so much better than the joystick for getting that autofocus point exactly where you want really quickly, so that you can focus on an animal and capture that moment before the animal moves. So loving that feature about this. And I've also been testing eye control autofocus a lot more this morning. More and more I'm noticing that it isn't the greatest thing for wildlife photography. Don't get me wrong, it definitely helps in some situations. You know, you can put your eye where you want to focus on that, and it will immediately acquire focus there, and then you can switch over to animal eye AF, and it will usually lock onto that animal immediately at that point. As opposed to if you're only using animal eye AF, you know, sometimes it has to search a little bit to find the animal, but with eye control, if you use that first to acquire initial focus, and then you switch over to animal eye AF, it is very quick and can acquire focus pretty flawlessly. So I do like that about it. But the thing is, and I'd heard this on reviews before I was able to rent the R3, you have to recalibrate the camera for every different lighting situation for eye control AF to work accurately. Not that it won't work with, you know, the last time you photograph with the calibration from that lighting situation. Not that it won't work, but it doesn't work very accurately, very quickly. And when you don't recalibrate it, it honestly gets in the way more than it helps with acquiring focus, because focus point isn't totally accurate and isn't landing exactly where you want it. So then when you focus, it's not focusing where you want it. So you basically, to get accurate focus each time and for it to really be worth it for wildlife, you have to recalibrate it every time, which obviously when calibration takes, you know, 30 seconds isn't ideal at all, because with wildlife photography, we're shooting in constantly changing lighting situations with constantly moving wildlife, and we're having to focus quickly and be, you know, on the ball constantly, and you can't really calibrate the camera for each different lighting situation and still be doing that. You're going to miss out on so many shots if you're trying to recalibrate every single time, and you'd be better off just relying on animal eye AF or spot AF as opposed to recalibrating so that you can use eye control AF. So definitely not liking that. I think if you're shooting in the same location in the same lighting scenario all day long or for the entire shoot, then maybe you could go ahead and calibrate it for that lighting and use it, and it would be worth it. But for the most part, there is not much application for eye control in wildlife so far. It helps when you are shooting in that same lighting situation, but and definitely for other styles of photography I think it'd be helpful, but for wildlife it's going to be somewhat difficult to use, and I think oftentimes it's going to get in the way more than it's going to help. So that's definitely unfortunate. But as far as the other focus methods, you know, spot AF, animal eye AF, and all that, zone AF, work just as well as they do on the R5 and the R6. It's just that you might not be able to apply eye control AF as much as you would want to for wildlife photography. Still overall liking the camera and have had a decent shoot with it this morning. So I'm going to continue to shoot a little bit more this morning while the light is still good. And then I'll be out this evening to test it out a little more and kind of finalize my initial in the field thoughts about the Canon R3. Let me interject here to briefly remind you all that I'm going to be giving away a free trip to Yellowstone National Park to photograph wildlife in the fall of 2022. Going to be announcing some more details on this soon, but all you have to do to be able to enter is to be a subscriber to the channel. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button down below. Let's get back to the video. I'm back out here at LBL now looking for elk again, and I've got about an hour and a half left of light. And I haven't seen anything yet, but just getting around my first pass around the loop here. and you know, hopefully we're gonna find something and be able to get some good photos testing out the R3 in this nice golden light this evening. It should be pretty good if I'm able to find some wildlife, and hopefully I will be able to. So guys, it's been a few days and I had to return the R3 already, but I did have a good few shoots there to test it out, especially that last shoot at Elk and Bison Prairie there. Didn't really get any photos in this vlog that I'm super proud of or that I think were great photos, but I got photos that pushed the R3's boundaries and really tested it out. Got to really test out sharpness by stopping down to like f7.1 and f8. To make sure that, you know, it wasn't the fact that my lens is wide open at 5.6 that might introduce softness. Eliminated that by stopping down some, so there was no issues with the lens. It's all dependent on how the sensor quality is, given that I stopped down some, and looks tack sharp on the back of the camera, so that looked great. Got to push ISO super high, got to shoot backlit a lot. Honestly, I shot backlit probably more than anything else this vlog, which wasn't really intentional, but was just how it worked out. And focus in backlit situations on this camera is very, very good. It's definitely not flawless. There were definitely times that it was kind of missing and was, you know, searching for focus, but for the most part, it was really, really good. And you know, backlit is usually a situation that a lot of cameras struggle in, and this camera struggled very little in backlit situations. Was definitely really good in that regard. And I also realized as I was shooting elk the other night that I had done things a little bit incorrect with eye control AF. The issue that I was having was because I didn't have tracking turned on for specifically eye control. So basically, whenever I focused with eye control, it would just focus and stay right there. It wouldn't track the animal because I didn't have tracking turned on. So once I figured that out and turned tracking on, it works a lot better for wildlife because you can put your eye on that animal, hold down to focus, and it will focus on the eye, and then it will track the eye wherever it goes in the frame. So it's really quick acquisition of initial focus, and then it tracks, which is awesome. But you still have the issue of calibration. It still needs calibrated every time because I hadn't calibrated for that lighting situation the other evening. Even though once I got the focus point on the eye, it was tracking, it took me forever to get it on the eye because calibration was off and it was bouncing around because it wasn't calibrated for that lighting. So you still have that issue where every lighting situation, you're going to have to recalibrate it. So it's still not really ideal for wildlife, but it's better for wildlife than I thought it was. Now that I figured out the tracking issue. And you know, maybe the more that you shoot with the R3, the more it learns your eye, and so you wouldn't have to calibrate it as much in different lighting situations. You know, I'm not totally sure on all that, but for the time that I used it, you definitely had to recalibrate it every time that you went out into a different lighting situation to get the most accurate results. So eye control is still something that I'm not totally happy with. But like I said, focus is great overall. High ISO is great. Sharpness is great. Battery life was definitely better than the R5. Still not as good as some of the old DSLRs. Those had great battery life. Because this is mirrorless, it's naturally not going to have as good of a battery life. But I will say it was better than the R5. And overall, I really did enjoy shooting with the R3, but my biggest problem with it still remains the lack of megapixels. I understand that Canon wants to keep file size down. They want to make sure that they have the best high ISO noise handling, and 24 megapixels for most situations is more than enough. But given that they have competitors like the Sony A1 and the Nikon Z9, which are double the megapixels of the Canon R3, I don't know why they wouldn't at least increase it to maybe 30 megapixels or 35 megapixels. It wouldn't have to be all the way up to 50. You know, if they want to make sure they're keeping file size down and still have good noise handling and all that, you wouldn't have to go as far as the A1 or, you know, the Z9. But because they've only made it 24 megapixels, the cropping ability that you have, the flexibility that you have to crop is just much worse than the R5 or the A1 or the Z9. You can't crop nearly as much. You have to be much closer to your subjects to get detailed shots. And now that we've been spoiled with cameras like the A1 and the R5 that perform so well in low light, high ISO, and that can, shoot at 45 and 50 megapixels, I don't really see why Canon wouldn't at least try to get a little closer to that. Maybe not all the way up to 50, like I said, but at least maybe 30 megapixels on this and allow a little bit more cropping in the camera. I just really don't like that about the R3. I think Canon has missed the mark a little bit on that, and it should have been higher megapixel. Now maybe they're going to come out with, an R1 next year that's going to have 50 megapixels, 30 frames a second, stacked sensor, everything that we want. It's going to be the new flagship for Canon, and it's going to be better than anything else. But as of right now, with the R3 being the flagship, I just feel like Canon missed the mark a little bit, and to be able to compete with Sony and Nikon, and even with their own R5, which costs $2,000 less, they should have had a little more megapixels in there. And that's my biggest disappointment as a wildlife photographer. I want to have those megapixels to crop in. So that's definitely the main problem that I had with the R3, but overall still really enjoyed it as a camera, and was pleased to be able to shoot with it. So those are my quick in the field initial thoughts on the Canon R3, but I'm going to be doing a full in-depth review on the R3 for wildlife and a comparison of the R3 to the R5 for wildlife in the coming weeks. Those are going to be two separate videos that I do, so stay tuned for those, guys. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe for that 1,000 subscriber Yellowstone trip that I'll be giving away here in the coming weeks. Drop a like down below and drop a comment as well. Let me know what you all thought. That would be much appreciated and helps the channel out a lot. And with that, guys, I want to thank you guys so much for sticking around through this whole video. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this, and that for those of you that are looking at the R3 as a wildlife camera, you found it helpful and informative. And with that, guys, that's all I've got. I will see you all in the next video.